You are listening to the Seven Rivers Student Ministry Podcast, a ministry of Seven Rivers Church in Citrus County, Florida. Here at SRSM, we believe that all students are lovable through a relationship with Jesus. Visit our website at sevenrivers.org/students. Hey guys, this is Mikey Puckett with Seven Rivers Student Ministry. You're listening to episode 14, For His Glory. This story comes to us from my friend Emilio Hood, who's one of the youth pastors at Perimeter Church in Atlanta, Georgia. Emilio is married to his wife, Hope, and he has 4 awesome children. They are keeping him busy during this quarantine season. I'm really excited that you guys are going to get an opportunity to hear a piece of Emilio's story where he experienced a tragedy. And the reason why I'm so excited to get to hear about this is because Emilio, when he experienced this tragedy, really asked a common question that we all ask when we experience tragic moments. He asked, is God good? Is he really good? And what we find as we listen to Emilio's story and as you listen to his story, you're going to realize that God is glorified in the good and the bad. All things, at the end of the day, God uses to bring himself glory. And so you guys are going to get an opportunity to hear this story. I'm so excited you get to hear from Emilio. I love Emilio. He is one of those people that when you meet him for the first time or you're around him, he makes you feel safe and comfortable. He gives you the space and the opportunity to be truly yourself. You don't have to prove anything to him or be anything other than who you are. And Emilio loves you exactly how you are. And it's such a reflection of Jesus when you encounter him. And so I really hope that one day you guys get the opportunity to meet him and get to be around him, because when you meet him, you immediately feel this kind of love and presence of God's love, because Emilio really does love you no matter what, and loves, the unlovable. And so it's a really, really awesome experience when you get to hang around him. And so as I've hung out with him, as I've gotten to know him, I've always just felt like this guy I can be myself with, I can be comfortable with, I can say what's on my mind, and he's going to give me truth and grace through the gospel. So, Emilio, thanks for being brave and courageous to share this piece of your story. Thank you for being willing to, give us a story that is heavy, that is hard, and that is probably was difficult for you to recall, and just so grateful for who you are. And for the blessing of your life and the blessing that the story brings us. So here is Emilio's story.
High school ministry director at Perimeter Church up in Johns Creek, Georgia. And your student pastor, Mike, he asked me and some other friends to share with you guys about a hard time in our life where we walked with God through it. And there've been a number of hard times in my life. There's not enough time to go through all of them, but the first one that came to my mind happened back in the summer of 2005, and I was at this Young Life camp in North Carolina called Windy Gap, and it was this place where I'd gone when I was a high school student. When I was a Young Life leader in college, I would take students on weekend trips there, and I did this thing called Summer Staff a few summers. Summer Staff was just a month each summer where I would go and I would serve God by serving this camp, by serving students, and I would be there with serving alongside 40 other people my age, and it was just some of my favorite memories come from these times of Summer Staff. And the summer of 2005 was actually my 3rd summer doing this, and believe it or not, if you saw a picture of me, you would be surprised by what I'm about to tell you. But I served with the horses. I was what they called a horse wrangler. So pretty much I got to pretend for an entire month that I was a cowboy, and man, I loved it. I loved waking up early. I loved giving trail rides. I loved becoming friends with these different horses, and I loved even just smelling like horse poop. Something about it just made me feel manly and awesome, and it was just some of the best memories of my life. Well, the third summer that I did this, the summer 2005, everything was normal. Everything was the way it was supposed to be, and nothing crazy had gone wrong. I think I got thrown off a horse once, but I remember it was the first day of the last week, and the first day of these camps for us was on Sundays, and buses would come from all over the country to bring high school students to this camp so they could experience living life to the full. They could experience heaven on earth. They could experience all that God had to offer. And these students would get off the bus and they'd be welcomed by work crew, these other high school kids who'd volunteered for a month to serve them, and then they were just released into camp. And I remember I was actually playing frisbee golf with my buddy Scott, who was our horse intern, and it was we had Sunday afternoons off. We weren't given trail rides, so we can kind of do what we wanted to do, and our favorite pastime when we weren't working with the horses was playing frisbee golf, and so that's what we were doing, and we were on the 6th hole, which is up on a hill, and again, we're just watching buses come in, and we're praying for them as they do, and not too long after we're playing again, we're on the 6th hole, and my buddy Scott, who has a radio on him, hears this call that says, "Hey, can somebody come to the gym immediately?" Which, if you hear that on the radio, wouldn't mean much to you. But for me and for Scott, it meant it created a sense of urgency, because we both knew through our time serving at this camp, working at this camp, that when you heard the word immediately on the radio, that it meant to call 911. You see, what happened was one of the groups that was coming for that week was from Chicago, and a group of sophomore guys who were all on the same basketball team got off the bus, dropped off their luggage in the room, and went straight to the basketball court. They didn't want to go down the zip line quite yet. They didn't want to jump into the pool. They didn't want to play volleyball. They went to the basketball court. And while they're there playing ball, the videographer, the guy who was documenting the week, thought, "Hey, I'm going to get a cool shot of you guys dunking." And so on this course, there were 2 rims that were lowered so that guys like me could experience the thrill of dunking a basketball. And so he wanted to get this shot of these guys, lining up, and he was under the hoop, and he would just get these guys just throwing it down over and over and over again. Well, there was one kid, Arthur, who wasn't as athletic as some of the other guys in his group, and he went up for the dunk, and the ball hit the front side of the rim, and his momentum pushed him in a way where he fell backwards. He ended up hitting his head on the basketball floor, knocking him unconscious. So again, the call came to call 911, and instead of seeing buses come through camp, we see an ambulance come through camp, and they pick up this kid, and we learned that before he even gets to the hospital, he was pronounced dead. He had a clot. A clot had formed, and he was pronounced dead before he got there. And we got the news later that evening around dinner time, and we were just devastated. Again, this is a place that I still call this place heaven on earth, and I remember being so hurt and confused and angry with God that he would allow something like this to happen at this camp. And I remember thinking, like, how could God possibly be glorified in this? How could these students possibly have the best week of their life? How could anything good come from this moment? Well, one of the things I learned is that God will take our hard times. He will take our hurt. He will take our pain. He will take the evil in this world, and he will turn it for good. Because at the end of the day, the truth is God can't not be glorified. It goes against God's nature to not be glorified. And so what I learned was that God was in control, that God was sovereign. You see, the guy who was speaking that month at the camp, the only other time at that point that there had been a Death to Young Life camp, he was there. So he knew how to walk through this with students. He knew how to approach it. And even that first night, instead of giving a normal talk, he talked about death. He opened up the floor to students who were hurting. He handled it beautifully. God orchestrated it in that the doctor who was there that week had brought his wife, who was a family counselor. And so she made herself available to talk with Arthur's friends, the guys on his team, the guys he was in the cabin with, as well as anybody who just needed to talk. We learned that Arthur was already a believer, that he had gone to camp mostly so he could get some of his non-believer friends to hear the gospel for the first time. And we were comforted knowing that his grandma wasn't mad. And if anything, she beautifully just talked about how she was excited to one day see him again in heaven. And so these little things start coming together. And at the end of the week, instead of it being this week that was defined by tragedy, was defined by God being glorified. Because that week, I think there were about 365 students, not including their leaders, 365 students who attended that week of camp. And I think about 250 of them ended up praying to surrender their lives to Christ. God can't not be glorified. And that week, I was pointed to this verse, these two verses in 1 Peter 4:12 and 13 that say this. Say, beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice insofar as you share Christ's sufferings, that you may also rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed. You see, here's the truth. We cannot be surprised at the fiery trial. We can't be surprised that we are in a pandemic right now. We might be surprised of what's going on. But the truth is, we're going to have trials. We're going to have times where we suffer. We're going to have times where we are filled with pain. We can't be surprised by that because we live in a world that is very much broken. But we can rejoice in that we share Christ's sufferings. Remember, Christ suffered for you. He was abused. He was spat on. He was rejected. He died. He did this for you. And so we can rejoice in that we share these sufferings. And then we can rejoice in his glory. Now, one of the reasons that I shared the story I did about what happened in Windy Gap is that in 6 days' time, I saw how God was glorified. I saw his glory revealed. It may take longer for you to see how his glory will be revealed. You may not even get to see it this side of eternity. But you can rest in the truth that God will be glorified. And you can rest in the truth that we can still rejoice in the suffering because we are suffering alongside our Savior, Jesus Christ. And my prayer for you in this time as we are hurting, as we are struggling, as we are filled with pain, my prayer is that you can hear these verses, or maybe you find another verse in Scripture that you can cling to, but that you will cling to him, that you will cling to the one who did suffer for you, and that you will rejoice knowing that he will be glorified, because God can't not be glorified. Praying for you. Love y'all, and I hope to see y'all. Bye.
Thank you for listening. If you would like to hear more stories and follow our devotions, you can go to www.sevenrivers.org/by life or by death. You are loved and you matter.